The rain-slicked streets of downtown Chicago glistened under the sodium glow of streetlights as Elena Harper trudged home from another 12-hour shift at St. Mary's Hospital. Her scrubs were damp, her dark hair plastered to her forehead, and the weight of exhaustion pressed against her shoulders like an invisible patient. But every evening, no matter how bone-tired she felt, Elena took the long way home, past the alley behind the old bakery where Mira lived. Mira was a ghost in rags, a homeless woman in her late 60s whose cough had turned wet and rattling weeks ago. Most people hurried past her cardboard shelter, eyes averted, but Elena couldn't. The first night she'd heard that cough echoing off brick walls, something in her nurse's heart had snapped awake. So it became routine. Elena brought hot soup in a thermos, antibiotics she quietly diverted from expired stock, clean bandages for the sores on Myra's legs. She checked her temperature, listened to her lungs with a stethoscope tucked in her coat pocket, and sat with her until the shivering eased. "You're an angel, child," Mira would whisper in her cracked voice, eyes bright with fever and something like wonder. Elena always laughed it off. Angels didn't live in studio apartments with leaking ceilings and overdue rent notices. Angels didn't eat instant noodles 5 nights a week just to afford bus fare. But Mira never forgot a kindness. Every visit, she pressed a small token into Elena's hand, a smooth river stone, a faded photograph of a grand house with columns, a tarnished silver locket she claimed held better days. Elena kept them all in a shoebox under her bed, not because they were valuable, but because someone had trusted her with pieces of their shattered life. One brutal December morning, the kind where the wind knifed straight through coats and hope alike, Elena's doorbell rang at 6:47 a.m., exactly 13 minutes before her alarm. She stumbled to the door in mismatched socks, expecting her landlord with another late rent lecture. Instead, a man stood there who looked like he'd stepped out of a luxury magazine. Tailored black overcoat, Italian leather shoes that probably cost more than her annual salary, silver threading his temples in a way that screamed distinguished rather than old. Behind him, a sleek black town car idled at the curb, its exhaust curling like smoke signals in the frozen air. "Miss Elena Harper?" His voice was smooth, precise, with the faintest trace of an accent Elena couldn't place. She clutched her robe tighter. "Yes?" He studied her for a moment, something unreadable flickering across his patrician features. Then he extended a gloved hand, holding a cream-colored envelope sealed with actual wax. "My name is Victor Langford. I believe you knew my mother." Elena's heart stuttered. "Your mother?" "Mira Langford," he said quietly, though the world forgot her name years ago. The envelope trembled slightly in her fingers as she took it. Inside was a single card, heavy stock, embossed with an address she recognized from Myra's faded photograph. The sprawling estate on Lakeshore Drive that had once belonged to one of Chicago's oldest fortunes. Victor Langford's eyes, strikingly similar to Myra's, now that Elena looked, softened almost imperceptibly. She passed peacefully in her sleep last night, in the hospital bed you helped arrange when her condition worsened. Her final weeks, she spoke of nothing but you. Elena felt the world tilt. The alley, the soup, the quiet conversations about gardens that no longer existed and children who'd stopped visiting. All of it crystallized into something sharp and aching in her chest. "She left instructions," Victor continued, gesturing toward the waiting car. "Very specific instructions regarding the person who showed her more kindness than her own blood ever did. She asked that I bring you to the house this morning." He paused, studying Elena's stunned face. "There's something she wanted you to see. Something she said only you would understand." The town car's door opened silently, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment. Victor Langford stepped aside, leaving the choice entirely to her. Elena looked down at her threadbare robe, her mismatched socks, the envelope still clutched in her shaking hand. Then she thought of Myra's river stones under her bed, of the locket with its hidden photograph, of a woman who died believing someone in this cold world still cared. She stepped forward into the impossible morning light. The car glided to the city like a secret, its heated leather seats enveloping Elena in a warmth she hadn't known she was missing. She caught a reflection in the tinted window. Wild hair, faded robe over pajamas, barefoot except for socks, and nearly laughed at the absurdity. Victor Langford sat opposite her in the rear-facing seat, silent, giving her space to process. He didn't fill the air with explanations or small talk, and somehow that restraint made him more imposing. They left the grid of downtown behind, sweeping north along the lake where the water churned gray and restless under a pewter sky. Mansions began to appear, set back from the road behind wrought iron gates and skeletal oaks. Elena had jogged past these streets before, always on the outside looking in, wondering what it felt like to belong to such places. Now the gates to one of them were swinging open for her. The Langford estate rose at the end of a long, curving drive flanked by stone lines worn smooth by a century of weather. It was larger than she'd imagined from Myra's photograph. A French chateau of pale limestone with steep slate roofs and tall, arched windows that caught the weak morning light like eyes waking up. Snow dusted the formal gardens, turning hedges into soft sculptures and the frozen fountain into a crystal crown. A woman in a charcoal suit waited at the top of the marble steps, mid-50s, hair pulled into a severe knot, posture suggesting she'd been running households like this since birth. She introduced herself as Mrs. Aldrich, the estate manager, and ushered Elena inside with the kind of efficiency that didn't allow for awe to linger. The foyer alone could have swallowed Elena's entire apartment building. A double staircase swept upward beneath a chandelier the size of a small car, its crystals tinkling faintly though there was no breeze. The air smelled of beeswax, evergreen, and something faintly medicinal, remnants, perhaps, of the private nurse who attended Mira in her final days here. Victor finally spoke. "My mother returned home 3 weeks ago, against medical advice, but it was her wish. She wanted to die in her own bed." His voice carried no bitterness, only fact. She refused to see me until the very end, said there were things she needed to settle first. He let Elena pass portraits of stern ancestors in oil and gold frames, past rooms shuttered with dust sheets, until they reached a set of carved walnut doors on the second floor. He paused, hand on the knob. This was her private sitting room. She spent most of her time here after she came back. She asked that you be brought here first, alone. Elena's pulse thudded in her ears. Alone? Victor nodded once, then turned the knob and stepped aside. The room beyond was smaller than she expected, almost cozy despite its proportions. Tall windows overlooked the lake, their velvet drapes drawn back to let in the pale light. A fire crackled low in a marble hearth. Books lined the walls, leather-bound volumes mingled with drugstore paperbacks, as if Mira had spent years collecting stories wherever she found them. On a low table in front of the sofa sat the shoebox. Elena's shoebox, the one from under her bed, river stones, faded photograph, tarnished locket, all arranged neatly beside a thick cream-colored journal she didn't recognize. Her breath caught. "How?" Victor's voice came softly from the doorway. "She had me retrieve it the day she was admitted to the hospital. Said she needed her treasures close." He hesitated. "I'll be downstairs when you're ready." The door closed with a gentle click. Elena approached the table, as though it might vanish. She lifted the journal first. Its cover soft Moroccan leather, embossed with a single initial, M. The pages crackled when she opened it, filled with handwriting she knew intimately from the little notes Mira used to press into her palm along with the stones. The first entry was dated 15 years earlier. "I have decided to disappear." Elena sank onto the sofa, pulling the journal into her lap. She read of a woman who had once hosted charity galas in this very room, who had worn diamonds the size of blueberries and smiled for society pages. A woman whose husband died suddenly, whose son, busy building empires overseas, left the running of grief to lawyers. A woman who discovered, too late, that her fortune had been gambled away by trusted advisors, that the house was mortgaged to eaves, that pride was a heavier burden than poverty. Page after page chronicled the slow unraveling. The sale of jewelry piece by piece, the dismissal of staff, the night spent alone in echoing rooms. Then the decision. No public scandal, no pleaded with a son who had already begun to look through her as though she were glass. She would simply walk away, take nothing but the clothes on her back and the locket with her wedding portrait. Let the banks have the house. Let the world assume she'd died. I would rather be invisible than pitted. The entries grew shorter as the years on the street accumulated. hunger, cold, the first cough that never quite left. And then one winter night, a young nurse with tired eyes and gentle hands who brought soup and refused to look away. You sat with me until the shivering stopped. You called me ma'am as though I still deserved respect. I did not tell you my name because I no longer believed I had one worth giving. Elena's eyes burned. She turned the pages faster. There were sketches now, pencil drawings of Elena's face as Mira remembered it under the street lamp, the curve of her stethoscope, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when concentrating, lists of small kindnesses. The night Elena brought 2 blankets because one wasn't enough. The afternoon she smuggled Mira into the hospital laundry room for a hot shower. The time she sang an old lullaby when pain kept Mira awake. Toward the end, the handwriting grew shaky but fierce. I have watched her give pieces of herself to strangers every day and still have enough left to give to me. She believes she is ordinary. She is wrong. Elena closed the journal, hands trembling. On the table, beside the shoebox, lay a single envelope addressed to her in the same hand. My dear girl, if you are reading this, I am gone and my son has done as I asked. Do not be afraid of him. He is more lost and cruel. He was raised to value empires over mothers, but blood remembers. Everything that remains is yours. Not out of charity. I have had my fill of that poison, but because you restored something I thought forever broken, the belief that a single human heart can still matter. The house, the land, the accounts I managed to hide from the vultures all these years. It is not as grand as it once was, but it is enough. More than enough. Use it as you wish. Tear it down and build something useful. Turn it into a shelter. Or simply live in it and let the walls learn what kindness sounds like again. There is one condition. Forgive my son if he asks for it. He will not know how to ask properly. Teach him, with more love than I knew I still possessed. Mira, Elena stared at the words until they blurred. She opened the locket from the shoebox, something she had never done, respecting Myra's privacy. Inside was a faded wedding portrait, yes, but on the opposite side, a newer photograph, small and carefully cut to fit. Elena and Mira, taken with Elena's phone one evening when Mira had briefly rallied. They were both laughing at something off-camera, Myra's thin hand clutching Elena's sleeve. Footsteps sounded in the hall. Victor knocked once, then entered carrying a tray with tea and toast as though he'd done this 1,000 times for grieving guests. Perhaps he had. He set it down and sat in the wing chair opposite her, waiting. Elena found her voice. She left me everything? Victor inclined his head. The house, the remaining investments, the offshore accounts she salted away before walking out. Roughly $42 million after taxes, give or take market fluctuations. He said it flatly, the way another man might mention the weather. There is also a letter for me. I have not opened it yet. He reached into his coat and produced an identical envelope. His fingers hesitated on the seal. Elena watched him, seeing for the first time the faint shadows under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. She wrote that you were lost, not cruel. A muscle jumped in his jaw. She would know. Silence stretched between them, filled by the pop of burning logs. Finally, Victor spoke again, quieter. I hired private investigators when she vanished. Year after year, they found nothing because she didn't want to be found. I told myself she was living comfortably somewhere warm, spending the money she took. I preferred that story to the truth. He looked around the room as though seeing it through her eyes. The threadbare patches in the Persian rug, the water stains on the silk wallpaper where leaks had been ignored too long. I came back when the hospital called. She was already here, in the bedroom down the hall. She let me sit with her, but only if I promised not to speak of money or lawyers until after. His voice roughened. Until after. Elena set Myra's letter aside and picked up one of the river stones, rolling its cool smoothness between her fingers. She kept every gift I ever gave her. Victor's gaze followed the motion. She kept nothing else. When we brought her home, all she had was a plastic grocery bag with 3 stones, that locket and your shoebox. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. I don't know what to do with any of this. The house needs millions in repairs. The staff was let go years ago. I can write checks, but I don't know how to. He gestured vaguely at the journal, at the tray of tea, at Elena herself. How to be what she wanted me to become in the time she had left. Elena surprised herself by reaching across the space between them and placing the river stone in his palm. Start by holding on to the things that matter. His fingers closed around it slowly. Downstairs, a grandfather clock began to chime the hour, its notes rolling to the quiet house like a heartbeat remembering its rhythm. Victor looked toward the sound, then back at her. Mrs. Aldridge has prepared a guest room. You'll stay, at least until the lawyers come tomorrow. Please. It wasn't quite a question. Elena thought of her studio apartment, the overdue rent, the shift she was supposed to work tonight. She thought of Myra's fierce, shaky handwriting asking her to teach forgiveness. She nodded. Victor exhaled a small, careful sound. There's something else you should see before you decide anything. He stood and crossed to an alcove Elena hadn't noticed, pulling back a heavy curtain to reveal a tall window seat piled with cushions. On it sat a large leather portfolio tied with ribbon. She worked on this every day. The nurse said she was strong enough, he said. Wouldn't let anyone look. Said it was for the girl who brought her soup. Elena untied the ribbon with fingers that still trembled. Inside were dozens of charcoal sketches and watercolors. Myra's view of the city from the alley. Children playing in snow, strangers on buses. But most were of Elena, reading a chart under harsh hospital lights, kneeling on wet cardboard to wrap a bandage, asleep in a plastic chair beside Myra's hospital bed with her head on folded arms. On the last page, a note in Myra's hand. For the shelter you will build, so no one ever forgets the faces of the people they save. Victor watched her turn the pages, expression unreadable. When she reached the end, he spoke again, almost too softly to hear. I don't know how to begin making any of this right, but if you'll let me, I'd like to learn. Outside, the first snowflakes of the day began to fall past the windows, soft and deliberate, covering the estate's scars with fresh, quiet white. Elena closed the portfolio and looked at the man who had once been Myra's little boy, now standing uncertain in the ruins of everything he thought he knew. She drew a breath that tasted of wood smoke and possibility. Then we'll start, she said, with tea. The tea grew cold between them, untouched, as the snow thickened outside the windows, blanketing the world in hush. Elena finally poured a cup for Victor, then one for herself, the steam rising like fragile bridges. They drank in silence at first, the way people do when words feel too small for the weight of what's passed between hearts. Days blurred into weeks. Elena called in her resignation from the hospital the next morning, her voice steady over the phone, despite the supervisor's stunned protests. She moved into the east wing of the estate. Not the grand master suite, but a sunlit suite overlooking the gardens, with a small balcony where she could watch the lake turn from iron to sapphire as winter reluctantly yielded to spring. Victor stayed, too, canceling board meetings in London and Singapore, delegating empires he'd spent decades building. He told himself it was to oversee the legal transfer of assets, but both he and Elena knew better. He was learning how to inhabit the house again, how to walk its halls without the armor of distance. Together, they began the slow resurrection of the place. Mrs. Aldridge, who had served the family since Victor was a boy, became their quiet ally, rehiring old staff who wept openly at the sight of lights burning once more in long dark windows. Contractors came and went, patching roofs, restoring plasterwork, coaxing the grand fountain back to life, so that water danced again under the April sun. But the heart of the transformation was not in marble or crystal. It was in the new wing they added, a low, modern structure of glass and wormwood extending from the rear of the chateau like an open hand. Myra's Haven, they named it, a shelter unlike any the city had seen. Private rooms instead of barracks beds, a medical clinic staffed by nurses Elena handpicked, gardens where residents could grow their own food, art studios filled with easels and the smell of turpentine. Every wall displayed Myra's sketches, framed simply, so that every person who entered would see themselves reflected in the eyes of someone who had once been invisible. Victor learned to swing a hammer alongside the carpenters, blister hands and all. He sat with residents in the evenings, listening to stories he'd once paid others to handle through charitable foundations. Elena taught him how to check a fever, how to wrap a bandage so it didn't pinch, how to sit with someone whose pain had no quick fix. In return, He taught her how to read balance sheets, how to negotiate with donors who wanted their names on plaques, how to protect the vulnerable from those who preyed on kindness. They fought, of course. Sharp words over budget overruns. Over Victor's instinct to throw money at problems Elena insisted needed time and touch. Nights when old ghosts rose. Myra's absence like a missing chord in a song they were trying to play together. But they learned the rhythm of apology, too. The way two people can stand in a half-finished room smelling of sawdust and paint and choose to stay. One June evening. The first cohort of residents moved in. 23 souls who had lived on the same streets Mira once had. Elena stood on the terrace watching them arrive. Some wary, some weeping, clutching small bags that held everything they owned. Victor came to stand beside her, no longer in bespoke suits, but in faded jeans and a work shirt rolled to the elbows. "They're terrified," he said quietly. "So was she," Elena answered. "So was I, the first night I slept here." He reached for her hand, a gesture that had become natural over the months, fingers lacing without hesitation. Together they walked down to greet the new arrivals, introducing themselves not as benefactors, but as fellow travelers who had been lucky enough to find a door opened by kindness. Years unfolded like petals. Myra's haven grew. A second location opened in the old bakery neighborhood, where Elena had once carried soup in thermoses. Scholarships sent former residents to nursing school, to art school, to trade programs. Victor liquidated portions of his empire, not all but enough, to create an endowment that would outlast them both. He sat on the board, but Elena ran the day-to-day, her vision fierce and practical, turning inherited wealth into living grace. They married on a golden September afternoon in the restored gardens, barefoot on the grass, because Elena insisted the earth should feel their promises. Only 30 guests, residents, staff, a few old friends from the hospital who had watched Elena disappear into legend and now understood why. Mrs. Aldridge cried into her lace handkerchief. Victor wore a simple linen shirt. Elena dressed the color of lake water at dawn. They spoke vows they had written themselves, promising not perfection but presence, not rescue but partnership, not to fix each other's broken places but to stand in them together. No one threw rice. Instead, children from the haven released butterflies bred in the greenhouse, clouds of orange and black rising against the sky like living confetti. And still the work continued. Late nights in the office they now shared, heads bent over plans for a new outreach van. Early mornings walking the grounds, checking on the vegetable beds where a formerly homeless veteran now grew prized tomatoes. Quiet evenings on the balcony, watching storms roll in over the water, talking about the next dream. Myra's house in other cities, perhaps, or a foundation that trained nurses specifically for street medicine. One December morning, exactly 5 years after the day Victor knocked on Elena's door, they stood together in the original sitting room where it had all begun. Snow fell thick and soft beyond the windows, the same hush as that first impossible day. The fireplace crackled. On the mantel rested the river stone Elena had placed in Victor's hand, now polished smooth by years of being carried in his pocket. They had come to hang a new portrait. Myra's face, painted from the photograph in the locket, but not the society matron of old. This was Mira as Elena had known her, eyes bright with fever and wonder, scarf wrapped around silver hair, a faint smile that held entire galaxies of survival and hope. Below it, a small brass plaque read simply, "She remembered what it felt like to be forgotten, so she taught us how to remember." Victor's arms slipped around Elena's waist as they stepped back to admire it, their reflection caught in the window overlaying the falling snow. Two people who had once been strangers to each other and to themselves, now woven inextricably into something larger. Elena rested her head against his shoulder. "She would have loved this," she whispered. "She does," Victor answered, voice rough with certainty. "Every single day." Outside, the garden slept under white, waiting for spring. Inside, lights burned warm in every window of Myra's haven, sheltering dozens who would wake tomorrow believing the world might still hold mercy. And in the grand old house that had once echoed with loneliness, laughter rose. Children chasing through halls that had known only silence for too long, residents sharing meals at a table that seated 50, staff singing off-key carols in the kitchen. Kindness, once a quiet act in a cold alley, had grown into a living thing, vast and unstoppable, rooted deep in restored earth, reaching toward light. And somewhere, in whatever place awaits those who have loved fiercely and been loved in return, Mira Langford smiled the smile she had saved for the girl who brought her soup on the worst nights of her life.